Hey, everybody. Welcome to this live stream. Just let me make sure I have all my ducks in a row here because I am going live on Instagram as well. Still trying to figure out how to make this all work smoothly. But thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Hope everybody has been having a wonderful weekend, whatever part of the weekend you're in right now, wherever you happen to be. Kip Lupton, woke Christian, says, "What does it mean to take the Lord's name in vain?" So, talking about the Ten Commandments, the Hebrew there literally says, "Do not lift up or bear the Lord's name in vain." And the idea originally had to do with swearing oaths, where you invoked God's name as part of the oath, as Adonai lives, or something like that. And the idea seems to be do not do that if you don't intend to keep the oath, or do not do that lightly. Do not do that if you're lying because you had oaths that were taken to prove your innocence in an ordeal or something like that. And so the idea would be, don't do that falsely. And you have Leviticus, I believe it's 19. I might have to look that up. But you have a very similar statement, only it's more explicit. It says, do not take the name of the Lord deceptively or dishonestly or for a lie or something like that. So that would have originally been the idea. But I think you later, as pronouncing the name of the Lord becomes taboo, I think you have a renegotiation of what's going on there. And so then I think we start to slowly over time move toward this idea of the name of the Lord, bearing the name of the Lord being a question of representation. Don't represent the Lord in vain. And then after that, then you have the idea of using the name of God or the word for God as a part of like profane things, profanity and things like that. So I think there are a few different ways historically it has been understood, but I think most scholars would agree that initially it probably had to do with prohibiting falsely invoking God's name while taking oaths, either oaths that you were going to fulfill something or oaths that you are innocent of some crime or something like that. Star Axie says, "Hi Dan, is there anywhere we can see the story of how you decided to go into the study of the Bible?" I've shared that story numerous times on podcasts and in interviews. I can't think of one off the top of my head, apart from maybe the Mormon Stories interview that I did with John Dehlin. But those are 3 interviews of 4 to 5 hours each. So I don't remember where in those interviews I shared that specific story, but it probably would have been in the first one, and probably for a couple of hours. Hayden Tank says, "We're live, everybody, on the Discord." Chrissy, hi Chrissy. Saw a little chunk of a video you did with Vishanti and Kip earlier. Shamgar says, "Hey Dan, hey Shamgar's Oxcode. Hi Silver, all hail Derek's knee." That's an inside joke. Something amazing. Thank you so much for the super chat. Can you talk about why Jesus is seen with a wand in older depictions of him when he performed miracles? So it probably doesn't fit exactly in the category of a wand as we understand it today, but we do have depictions, particularly in some of the catacombs and things like that, where Jesus seems to be holding a little staff that looks kind of like a wand, but it's also the staff that Moses is holding in some of the similar catacomb frescoes and paintings and things like that. So these paintings are taking place, or these paintings were created by followers of Jesus who were operating in Greco-Roman society and were appealing to the canons of Greco-Roman art. And so I think it's probably a little closer to a staff of authority, like either a ruler or something like that might bear, or the staff that Moses held was considered a staff of some kind of authority. But it's also kind of there's a little bit of conceptual blending going on there with something closer to what we might consider a wand. But I don't think it's as clear cut as some folks want to make it out to be. I still think the folks who made it just probably thought they were depicting them carrying a staff that signaled their authority. Chrissy says, yeah, I may have greatly aided in causing that video with Kip and Vishanti to go way too long. LOL. Hey, that's fine. Those are a lot of people really enjoy the long ones. I need to do a long live stream or something like that, but that's just not, my schedule won't allow something like that right now. Why do some denominations think that women can't be pastors? This is rooted in the fundamental patriarchal nature of ancient Christianity, and we find it in places like the pastoral epistles, particularly in Timothy, and then we also have a couple of passages in 1 Corinthians that most scholars, I think, would agree are interpolations. And the pastoral epistles are also pseudepigraphical, not written by Paul. And I think those are the main proof texts for the idea that women shouldn't hold ecclesiastical authority, but we find elsewhere references to women holding all kinds of different positions of authority within early Christianity. So perhaps you can make commitments like a long stream after the book's released. Perhaps, yes. Although I think through June, yeah, that's not going to be possible. Yeah. So although I'm planning on taking July off, still making videos and stuff like that and doing live streams, but I'm going to try to pull back on other kinds of media appearances so that I can spend some more time with the fam. Okay, and I apologize for leaving that up there. Shamgar's Oxagode says, hey, Dan, wife and I just went through the book of James. Any interesting background you could give about that epistle? Is it really from Jesus's brother? And it sounds like he and Paul would have beef about the role of faith and works in salvation. I tend to think that James is disagreeing directly with Paul in appealing to the idea of Abraham being justified by faith versus works. So I think the early chapters of Romans are a target there. So I tend to think that a lot of Paul scholars want to try to harmonize the two. I don't think there's any case to make that was actually written by the brother of Jesus. James would have died fairly quickly in the history of early Christianity, and that epistle doesn't come until later, I think is the consensus view. So I don't know a ton about the background of it, apart from that it is almost certainly pseudepigraphical. Josiah, thank you so much for the super chat question. Hey, Dan, I'm a huge fan of you these days. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for the work you do. What is your view on the utility of AI to learn things like religion and the Bible? AI is just trained on whatever's on the internet or whatever is in, it's being trained on. And so it doesn't really do much other than synthesize what is available already out there. And I think it can be misled an awful lot because there's an awful lot out there that is not methodologically, academically robust. If you look at all the scholars who are more on the conservative apologetic side versus those that are on the critical side, I think there would be the ones on the apologetic side are going to outnumber the ones deeper on the critical side. And so an AI machine might mistake that for them having a better argument. So I think there are issues. I think there are ways that AI can be used to be very helpful, but at the same time, I don't like that a lot of publishers are selling scholars' intellectual property without the permission and without compensation for the scholars. And so to best train AI on things like religion and the Bible, you would need to give them the best scholarship, but to just make that all publicly available without compensating the folks who produced or generated that scholarship, I think would be wildly unethical. And this is a big debate that's going on right now within scholarship. So I use it from time to time when I need to find something quickly. I'll be like, what are the seminal publications? And I know a lot of people just hate that adjective seminal, but if I come up upon a research question I've never looked into before, I'd be like, what are what publications should I look at from the last 50 years that address this particular question? And then I use it as a jumping off point. It's always the beginning of a research project, but never the end. So I think there are ways to use it responsibly and well, and it has an awful lot of limitations, and I don't think I would ever trust it to draw conclusions and things like that. So, but yeah, it's the way things are going, whether we like it or not. Philip, thanks so much for the question. What's the academic consensus on whether or not the disciples really believed in the resurrection? I mean, there's not a ton that we know about the disciples. All we know is traditions that accreted to their names and their stories, and I think most of those are probably fairly suspect. I think it's probably likely that many of them believed in the resurrection. Whether I don't know how many of them had what they would call personal experiences with the resurrected Jesus. For that, we really have to rely on the second, third, and fourth hand accounts of later writings, and those are limited to just a few early references. So there's not a whole lot that we can know. I think an awful lot of scholars take the traditions fairly seriously. And so I think most would say, yeah, they probably did believe to some degree, but belief is also a pretty squishy concept. We tend to think of it as something that's pretty black and white, and it 100% is not. It is something that ebbs and flows, that comes and goes, that has different dimensions and different layers. And a good example of that is discussions within the cognitive science of religion on religious beliefs as not actually being firmly held beliefs, but being religious credences. Are you willing to sign off on something? Are you willing to assent to something so that you can benefit from the access to power and resources that membership in the group gives you? And there's a lot of complexity to the interaction of our intuitive cognition and our reflective cognition and those identity politics in what we think, what we believe, how that changes over time, and all that kind of stuff. So it's phenomenally complex. Do you ever comment on how the Hebrew Bible is used to justify the current situation in Israel-Palestine? I have, in the past, I've probably commented more regularly than the last few months because I've had a lot of other things taking up my attention. But yeah, I've talked at length about the oh gosh, now I'm even forgetting what it's called. The hypothesis that a lot of people, the Khazar hypothesis, is something that a lot of people come up with as ways to try to dismiss Jewish or Judean or Judahite or Israelite presence in the land in the ancient world. I've talked a little bit about people trying to use the name Ashkenaz in the Table of Nations to try to for anti-Semitic purposes. I've talked about I've talked about this quite a bit in the past. It's definitely been a few months since I've addressed something related to that, though. Orsak Narrative Universe, thank you so much for the super chat. So thought, 100% the Bible endorses slavery. Also, most of the Bible is aimed at creating a just and equitable society. Isn't this a contradiction? Not logical, but moral. Can the later renegotiation be seen in that light? Well, yeah, when we look at the Declaration of Independence, what do we see? We see all men are created equal, and that was written by someone who enslaved his own children. So a lot of people want to think that people's principles and morals and ethical frameworks and everything like that are perfectly consistent, and they're not. There's always inconsistency. There's always hypocrisy, particularly the more built up and fleshed out someone's moral philosophy is, because morality is fundamentally guided by intuitive predispositions that are put there by evolution, by the universal experiences of growing up human, and all that kind of stuff. So the idea of a just and a righteous and an equitable society is not what we understand by that. It is the ancient concept is basically that, there are people who are going to be orphans, there are people who are going to be widows, there are people who are going to be poor, there are people who are going to be enslaved. But they have a role to play in society, and yes, it's stratified, and yes, it's hierarchized, but they shouldn't be experiencing things that are not expected within that role. An enslaved person, it's expected that they're going to be disciplined at times and beaten and things like that. But the beatings should not be too severe, as we see in Exodus 21, verse 20, for instance. And you have the same rules in the pre-Civil War Southern U.S. So the state code of Louisiana, there's one of the laws says that the master has complete rights over the enslaved person, and they can discipline them, but not, and I don't remember the exact words, but not unduly harshly or to subject them to the threat of death or something like that. So even in the society that was the worst in the modern world with slavery, they still had these expectations. And I'm sure that they thought of, if someone operates within the guidelines that are provided, and they beat their enslaved folks from time to time to discipline them, but it's not like they break their bones. It's not like they maim them. It's not like they kill them. Then that enslaved person probably can't or has no leg to stand on in claiming that they're being abused or treated inappropriately, and so someone would understand that to be just treatment. So it's isn't the contract not logical? More can the later renegotiation be seen in that light? And so, you still have to understand all of these things within the context of their own time and how they structured their society. And they definitely were not allies as we understand the concept today. But thank you for bringing that up. Sometimes I don't always have an opportunity in a video to kind of flesh all those things fully out, and there are always clarifications that I wish I could go back and make. But like, I don't script my videos. I sit down in the morning and I slam some caffeine, and I hit record, and I just start yapping. And however many takes it takes me, that's how many takes it takes me, and I get what I'm trying to say out. And there are frequently times when I'm like, oh, I said something in a previous take and I missed it on this one, and or something doesn't come out right, or I omit stuff. So but that's how I can consistently deliver the videos. But frequently that means there are clarifications I wish I could make. But thank you for a great question. TWE, hi Dan, I'm curious on your thoughts on Luke 19:12 through 27, especially 26 through 27. It seems to be a drastic change from scolding someone for not investing to killing someone for treason. So if this is a parable, then that's probably the main thing. But let me see what we got here. We're looking at parables. So and this is one thing that a lot of people try to press parables into more granular and detailed service than they're really intended to serve. And so parables tell a lot of stories that utilize a lot of different social relationships and events and things like that. And I think a lot of people want those to be endorsements of those social relationships. And that's like when I responded to Dave Ramsey, I pointed out that you could look at the parable of the talents and say, well, God wants us to be investing money and making more money. And if you understand the parable to be endorsing the structure that was deployed for the sake of the parable's message, then you could get that. But most scholars would say that violates the intent. But let me see what 26 and 27. For I say unto you that unto everyone which is this the that's the parable of the talents. Okay. So but those mine enemies which would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. That's that is an odd verse, and doesn't really fit the context very well. That could be something that was added later. But yeah, what I would usually say when we're looking at parables is don't take the parable too seriously. It's certainly not an endorsement of that. It's just talking about kind of the way things are and using those relationships and those events uh, to map onto some kind of gospel principle without necessarily understanding the original content as being endorsed. I'll have to look into that. I'll have to look into what commentaries say about the potential that maybe that is a later insertion. Now, obviously, what's going on here probably doesn't go back to Jesus. It's probably the production of later authors anyway, but later than the life of Jesus anyway. Okay, I'm going to look that up. Thank you for a great question, though. Mac P. Dave says your content is outstanding, sir. Thank you so much. I appreciate the very kind words. How many shirts do you own? In all caps. It's probably around 125 or so. I think I've got 3 more on the way. Yeah, I've got 3 more on the way that should arrive some point this coming week. Is there any legitimacy to Mary Magdalene's writings and it being Gnostic? I think most scholars would say it's probably Gnostic, or at least Gnostic-ish. It's lacking kind of the classic Gnostic cosmology, but we also don't have the whole thing. There's no legitimacy historically to that. That is something that is a literary creation, probably from the early 2nd century CE. Shamgar's Oxgoat says, I had a discussion in the comments on a Religion for Breakfast video regarding the Sabbath, the Lord's Day, and the Day of the Lord. Someone posed that the Lord's Day for early Christians was Sabbath, 7th day, and they use the term interchangeably with the Day of the Lord. I know that the Lord's Day is only mentioned in Revelation, but what else can we know about this day in early Christianity? Is it connected to the Day of the Lord from the OT or the Sabbath at any point, either biblically or in early Christianity? So the Lord's Day in the New Testament is a reference to the Sabbath. Now, it seems like pretty quickly that shifted from Saturday to Sunday. I would have to go check the scholarship on where there may be exceptions in the New Testament. But the Day of the Lord from the Hebrew Bible is supposed to be like the when the Lord finally restores everything. This, this kind of thing that's going to be greater than the Exodus from Egypt. That's the day of the Lord, whatever's supposed to happen in the latter days. So that's not the same as the Sabbath. But yeah, I don't think I've heard much in the way of scholarship comparing the Lord's Day from the New Testament to the Day of the Lord from the Hebrew Bible. But that may just be a blind spot on my part. Heaven knows I have a lot of them. Something amazing. Thanks so much for the super chat. Another question. How do scholars go about understanding the family tree of Adam down to Noah? I think, is there any historical reliability to this? No, and there are 2 different family trees. Genesis 4 and Genesis 5 have 2 different genealogies. You have a lot of the same people in there, and then you have names that are clearly based on some third original, but they've deviated a little bit from each other. And yeah, these are literary creations. There's absolutely nothing historical about that, because the primeval history is a literary creation. Carl J. says, I've been really enjoying Dr. Amy Jill Levine's book, Short Stories by Jesus, where she looks at the parables from various angles. Yes, Amy is phenomenal. The Bible with and Without Jesus is another phenomenal book that she wrote with Mark Z. Bretler. That is very, very good. Chief Dixon, thanks so much for the question. You use gender neutral language, and some Bible translations do, but if we are to read the Bible in context, why use gender neutral language? The original transcripts did not use it. So it's kind of a spectrum, because yeah, when it comes to references to God, overwhelmingly, almost unilaterally, it is gendered and male gendered. And so when I translate, I will use gendered pronouns and things like that. Now, when it comes to things like when Paul says, refers to the Adelphi, that can be, just like Spanish, If you say amigos to a group of people, or you say something like that, hermanos, and it's a gender mixed company, that's fine. You use the masculine plural to refer to a mixed gender group. And so there are an awful lot of scholars who will say some parts of Paul, it seems pretty clear that he's referring to men and women. And so you would want to, and rather than just saying brothers, say brothers and sisters or something like that. Siblings is a rendering that some translations use. And there are other times when it's not so clear, where it seems like Paul is specifically referring to men when he says brothers. And so there's kind of gender neutral language that is used in some modern translations that tries to be sensitive to that. I don't think you can just pick one and use it every single time. I don't think that will be incredibly accurate, but those are hard things to tell. So I think there's a spectrum, at least when it comes to talking about and to other humans. But when it comes to God, yeah, overwhelmingly, it is God is gendered male. However, I want to point to that's not what I meant to do. I want to point to something real quick. A couple of papers that were published in the Journal of Biblical Literature over the last few years. And give me just a second to find them and pull them up, and I'll just share them real quick. Okay, so let me just share this real quick. Whoa. Sorry, I recently upgraded to whatever the new Mac operating system is, Sequoia or something like that, and I'm still trying to figure out how to use it. It is I move windows around and then it's just like, oh, you want me to fill up the entire desktop with this? Okay. Okay, so we're gonna go share this window. So we're gonna start here. David J.A. Kleins is a Hebrew Bible scholar, lexicographer, who's written one of the leading lexicons for biblical Hebrew. In 2021, published this alleged female language about the deity in the Hebrew Bible in response to some scholarship that emphasizes the fact that there are metaphors describing God as a nursing mother and a pregnant woman and stuff like that. And then there's a response, still invisible after all these years, female God language in the Hebrew Bible, a response to David J.A. Kleins from 2022 that I think provides some wonderful contextualization. So let me read some of the abstract. Well, I'll just read the abstract. In a recent JBL article, David J.A. Kleins reviews 22 Hebrew Bible texts that allegedly include female God language. His review concludes there is not a single instance of female language about the deity in the Hebrew Bible. 3 major methodological difficulties undermine this unqualified conclusion. The selective choice of conversation partners, together with an inattention to the history of feminist biblical scholarship, the author's decision to exclude metaphor theory from the scope of his article, and finally his paradoxical failure to define at the outset what female language means in reference to the deity. The article's significant methodological deficiencies make its conclusions inevitable and, in effect, yield a literalist reading. Given the importance of the topic to the discipline, the present response provides a more hermeneutically self-aware analysis of the methodological and theoretical issues. The study demonstrates that feminist scholarship has an intellectual history essential to exegetical studies of such texts, and that metaphor theory is essential to any discussion of gendered language for the deity in the Hebrew Bible. So I think that paper, that response brings up a lot of good points. And yeah, if you're interested in gendered deity language in the Hebrew Bible and in modern translations, I think that would be those papers would be a good place to start. Hey, Eddie, why so many translations based on the Masoretic instead of Septuagint if it older and more complete Hebrew scripture and was directly quoted in the NT? It's because, within Judaism, the Masoretic text is authoritative. The Septuagint is not. It is largely considered corrupt, although depending on how seriously folks take the scholarship, they will recognize that there are readings in the Septuagint that are believed by many to be earlier. But if you look at like the Jewish Study Bible, the JPS Tanakh, they almost unilaterally, not unilaterally, but almost rely on the Masoretic text. Most Christian translations, particularly the more scholarly ones, will rely on the Masoretic text, but supplement it with appeal to the Septuagint, the appeal to the Dead Sea Scrolls, appeal even to like Targumim and the Vulgate and things like that. So they'll try to get their readings from wherever they can. However, most translations of the Hebrew Bible are basing their source text is what's called a diplomatic edition of the Hebrew Bible. So within textual criticism, the editions that you have are either diplomatic or eclectic. A diplomatic edition is we're relying on a single manuscript. Now, we may supplement it. We may say, oh, well, there's this Dead Sea Scroll thing over here, but our base source text is a single manuscript. And in the case of the Masoretic text, that would be the Leningrad Codex. An eclectic manuscript is what you get when you want to translate the Greek New Testament into English, because the critical edition that you can get, and let me, so for instance, the NA28, this is the most up-to-date critical edition of the Greek New Testament you can, well, no, there are some others. I don't think the United Bible Societies has produced one since the release of the NA28. The SBL Greek New Testament, I think, is about the same age as the NA28. But if you look at it, it's got the Greek, it's got some notes, it's got a critical apparatus talking about variants, but there's no single manuscript that looks like what we have in the Greek. This has been cobbled together through comparison of literally thousands, but really there are about 200 that make up the bulk of the text. It's cobbled together from all those different manuscripts. So that's called an eclectic manuscript. So when we talk about the Masoretic text instead of the Septuagint, most translations are going to rely almost entirely on the Leningrad Codex. Now, there are translations of just the Septuagint. In fact, the Net's New English translation of the Septuagint is a wonderful translation. It is a little idiosyncratic because they did not kind of, there was not really a style unification or an editorial unification. The translators of the different books had kind of free reign to do what they wanted. But this is freely available online. You can Google the New English translation of the Septuagint and find PDFs of all the books that are in here. So that would be an English translation based on a diplomatic, well, actually, no, it wouldn't even be a diplomatic edition of the Septuagint, because this is not like Sinaiticus or something like that. This is also going to be probably Ralph's. This is probably based on Ralph's edition of the Septuagint or the Göttingen Septuagint. But although the Septuagint has a lot of older readings, to just say we're going to rely entirely on the Septuagint would be a bad idea, because overall the Masoretic text is probably a lot more reliable than the Septuagint. And hopefully that answers your question. Becky J. Barry says, do you worry at all about your new book being banned? You have progressive views that I agree with, but so many do not. No, I have not thought about that. I don't think, I mean, like, I don't imagine it's going to end up in many public school systems anyway, and so it wouldn't surprise me if they banned it from there, but no, I don't worry about that. Joseph, thank you so much for the question. What are your thoughts on Matthew 16:28? Is Jesus directly claiming to return in the generation of those he's talking to? Yes. And is 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 18 is a reassurance letter from Paul? Thank you. Yeah, I think 1 Thessalonians is most scholars think that that's probably the first letter that was written by Paul that has survived. And but in terms of Matthew 16:28, the Olivet, well, we're not yet to the Olivet discourse, or are we? Eh. Yeah, that's not quite the Olivet discourse, but yeah, the idea is that the second coming would be in their lifetimes, and Matthew is probably right around the pivot point where people are figuring, maybe this is not happening as soon as we thought, and so you have like in Second Thessalonians, you have in some of the other pseudepigraphical Pauline texts where they're like, oh, wait a minute, there's going to be a little bit of a pause. We got to have this, this man of sin has got to be revealed. We're going to have all this stuff has got to happen first. Then we'll get back to Jesus's second coming. And there's a degree to which some of Matthew may kind of be trying to, hit from both sides of the plate regarding that. But I think that promise Matthew's probably drawing from Mark. And Mark, I think, was written with that in mind, that Jesus was going to be coming back, and before some of the people standing there passed away. Is there a resource that shows the percentage of the majority and minority of scholars who agree/disagree about a certain subject? I'm working on it. I have a large-scale survey that I'm working on getting disseminated around the world to thousands and thousands of scholars so that we can have that resource. And ideally, this would be something that I re-up every 5 years or so, and it would be published somewhere. And right now I have like 155 or 160 questions on there or something like that, research questions, where you would be able to go and see not only what percentage agrees, what percentage disagrees, but we would be able to break it down based on demographic data as well. How many people who have contingent faculty status in a conservative university where they had to sign a statement of faith agree with this or disagree with that? Like, I think it would be a phenomenal resource. But I'm still working with folks on a means of distributing it. I feel like I've seen a lot of apologists putting themselves on the same level as biblical scholars. What would you say is the main difference between them, or what separates from apologists? So like it's a spectrum, and it's pretty fuzzy. I think you have people going back and forth in different kinds of scholarship and in regards to different research questions. But overall, I would say, is the person trying to defend the validity of a conclusion that they brought to the data, or is the person trying to defend something that they have arrived at through a critical look at the data? And that's not something that there's no paper you can rub on somebody's forehead to see, you're a dogmatist. But yeah, usually in the scholarship you can tell. For instance, if somebody continually makes arguments where they say it's plausible that, or they say we have good reason to believe that, and they're appealing to a minority of conservative scholars and never really directly address the more robust critical side of the discussion, they've definitely come to the data with a predisposition, with a dogma, with a presupposition in mind, and are trying to construct a convincing argument for the support of the data to their dogma. And I apologize for leaving that question up there. Shamgar Zoxcode says, I've been reading God's Monsters with my stepmother, which I have somewhere. There it is. God's Monsters by Esther Hamori. Wonderful book. But she seems to be hung up on the tone of the book being, in her words, antagonistic. She's not going to like my book then. She thinks Dr. Hamori is too hard on God and has paints her as angry. Any advice on getting around this view? Meet Esther. She's the kindest woman in the world. But yeah, I fell in love with the tone of the book because I was reading it and was like, I wish my own writing could be so witty and funny and piercing. And so, yeah, I would just say Esther is a phenomenal person. She's not she's not angry at God. She doesn't hate God. She's just trying to engage the text on its own terms, and without a lot of the predispositions that that I think kind of distort what's going on in the text. Fun fact, she has your book on pre-order, LOL. Hopefully she's okay with the F word. I think Esther also likes to have a lot of fun with it. Yeah, absolutely. Gravity Fallout Pines, thank you so much for the super chat. Which books of the New Testament are we confident were actually written by the author the book is named after? Were any of the books possibly written after persecution killed the original apostles? Thanks. I would say the Undisputed Pauline Epistles and Revelation. Those are the ones that I think the majority of scholars, the overwhelming majority, would say, yeah, we have no reason to doubt that Revelation was written by some dude named John. I don't think anyone would agree that the author of Revelation is the same John as the author of any other text that bears that name. And then the Undisputed Paulines. So like Ephesians, Colossians, 2 Thessalonians, Titus, 1st and 2nd Timothy, those are the disputed or the spurious Pauline epistles that were probably not written by Paul. So yeah, it's not a long list. But yeah, there are some that scholars are like, yeah, we're fine with that. CF, thank you so much for the question. What's a good way for an amateur scholar to learn? I would say read all the scholarship you can. There are kind of 3 stages of scholarship that I usually recommend for someone trying to get into learning more about the Bible. One, the first stage is a good study Bible. The New Oxford Annotated Bible is a good start. The SBL Study Bible is a good start. The Jewish Study Bible, if you're just interested in the Hebrew Bible, is a wonderful start as well. The New Oxford Annotated... The Jewish Annotated New Testament is also good. So a good study Bible will have wonderful introductions to books, have wonderful explanatory notes. Many of them will have essays or mini essays at the end or scattered throughout that will help explain things. So that's step 1. Step 2, I would recommend introductions to or histories of the Bible. So the 3 that I would highlight, where I would start if I were putting together an introduction to biblical scholarship package, is I would say 1, John Barton's A History of the Bible, which I think is the best history of the Bible available. It can get a little technical, but I think it does a phenomenal job, published in 2019. The newest edition of An Introduction to the New Testament by Bart Ehrman and Hugo Mendez is on this new edition. I think it's the 8th edition. I would recommend that for the New Testament. Something like John Collins' Introduction to the Hebrew Bible. I think it's in a 3rd edition right now. That would give you a good introduction to where scholarship stands in the Hebrew Bible. So that's phase 2. Phase 3, stage 3, that would be your commentaries. And I usually recommend 4 commentary series. Hermeneia is my favorite. Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary is my second favorite, although now that Candida Moss has been put in charge of the Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary, we'll see if she can leapfrog Hermeneia. And then I also really like the Old Testament Library and the New Testament Library, and then the International Critical Commentary series. That's going to give you a lot more granular data. That's going to, as these new volumes come out, that's going to give you a much broader view of the landscape of the scholarship on the given books. So those are the 3 stages I would recommend. Shamgar Oxcode said, speaking on amateur scholars, have you seen Milo Rossi's presentation on the need for generalists to fight misinformation? It sounds vaguely familiar, but I have not seen it. But I might have to look into that. I know you fall more on the left politically, but are there people on the right outside of MAGA maybe who you respect or follow? Thanks for all your work. Thank you for the kind words. There are some folks that I think are a little more kind of pluralistic in their approach that are either friends of mine, and so I respect, or I think have made some interesting arguments. Unfortunately, none are really springing to mind right now. Somebody who I've seen say stuff I really agree with, but then I've also seen say stuff I don't really agree with. Would be somebody like Michael Bird. I don't know him personally. I've seen him a ton of times at like SBL. I've never talked with him personally, but my next academic book, apart from some edited volumes that I'm working on, is probably going to be engaging directly with his Jesus Among the Gods, which is a book on early Christology. And give me just a moment to put some stuff back. But I try to expose myself to. Yes. Yeah. Okay, sorry about that. My I have some sick girls in the household, so now people running in and out of the front door. All right. Cameron, thanks so much for the question. Hi, Dan. A big reason I just left the LDS faith is because of the violent character of God. Thoughts on God's character and any book recommendations? There is certainly an awful lot of violence associated with God in parts of the Hebrew Bible as well as the New Testament. God's Monsters by Esther Hamori, I think, is a good discussion of some of the ways that God kind of offloads responsibility for violence to subordinates, to their creations. I think there's. There have been an awful lot of discussions of this. Carolyn Blythe published Violence in the Bible for Normal People, a guide to biblical texts of terror, which was produced by the Bible for Normal People. In fact, I don't even know if that's fully out yet. But there's a chapter on divine violence in there. That's probably the most accessible discussion I think you're going to be able to find. This is, I don't have the cover, but this is the title page, and then the table of contents talks about the different types of violence that we see in the Bible. So I think that would probably be one of the better, more accessible discussions regarding violence in the Bible, and particularly divine violence. So that would probably be my my recommendation. And there are going to be there's going to be bibliographic stuff in there as well. So you can look up other discussions. Would you say the Strong Concordance is a good aid? If not, which one would you recommend? No, I would not say it's a good aid. I think it's most useful to people who already know the languages fairly well and how the languages work. And since most people who are accessing it are doing it only because it's freely available on the internet, they do not have the training, and that makes it problematic. And they pretty much always misuse it. Which aids would I recommend? I would recommend learning the languages first so that you can competently use the aids. Otherwise, I think we run into problems with a lot of assumptions that people make about how to use lexicons and how language works. But once you have somewhat of a grasp on how ancient languages work and languages in general, I would recommend something like Accordance. That's my favorite Bible software, and the free version doesn't have a ton of great stuff on it. But once you can, pay for some of the modules that allow you to get more updated scholarship, I think it's the best resource out there. Now, if you just don't have any resources to be able to commit to something like that, like Blue Letter Bible, I think is about as good as you can do. I think there's some stuff. I know people are going to know off the top of their heads what these other Bible softwares are that are good and free, and I can't remember what they are. I think there was one called eSword for a while. There's some Olive something group that does I think some free Bible software resources. I don't know a ton about them, but some of those are good. But if they're free, it's because they're relying on materials that are in the public domain, which means they're relying on stuff that is a century or more old. So that's why I tend to shy away from those kinds of things. Anderson, thank you so much for the question. Hey, Dan, I'm a big fan of what you do. I appreciate it very much. Which Spanish translation of the Bible do you think would be the best for someone who wants to read the Bible for the first time? I get this question a lot, and I spoke with someone who worked with a Spanish language publisher the last time I was at SBL, but it seemed to me they were just trying to push one of their own products rather than give me a good breakdown of what translations are available. I don't know off the top of my head is a good answer. The first thing I think of is one of the updates or revisions to the Reina Valera, but I really don't know for sure which of those can be trusted and which version of those editions can be trusted. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of intelligent things to say about that, but give me just 1 second and let me see if I can recall some Okay, two translations that I've seen that I remember seeing. Well, one that I remember seeing previously is Biblia de las Americas. I can't say that I have personally read that, and then another one that I've seen more recently is La Biblia Textual, produced by the Sociedad Bíblica Iberoamericana. So looks like the 4th edition was released in 2016. So those two, I imagine, based on what the translations I've come across, may be some of the more critical, more scholarly ones. But I'm going to have to, in fact, let me write this down. I'm going to have to reach out to some friends and get a better recommendation. Okay. I'm going to look into that and have a better answer for you next time that comes up. Love you and your stuff, Dan. Thank you so much. Have you done videos that touch on the Apocrypha? Curious for your takes. I've done a number of videos that touch on the Apocrypha. I posted one just a bit ago that was kind of a what is the Apocrypha video. Yeah, that was only 2 weeks ago. And let me see. Let me get you the tag on that. That is number Maklelan 2582. What is the Apocrypha? So that's probably the most recent one. But I did have an update on that because of something that some friends reached out to me on it to correct a small comment. Gravity Fallout Pines, thanks so much for the question. Who exactly were the Old and New Testaments written for? What context should we keep in mind as we try to apply these texts to our lives today? So you got to take it on a case-by-case basis because nothing known. Sorry, I keep hearing one of my daughters yelling, and it sounds like she's yelling for me, but I'm not sure if she is. Yeah, we don't have anything known as the Old Testament as we know it today until after it was all completed. So none of the texts in the Hebrew Bible were intended for that kind of context. So we got to go on a book by book basis, and in some cases you got to break it down even smaller than that. So books like Genesis and Deuteronomy and Judges and Psalms, that's a collection of texts written by a bunch of different folks over the course of several centuries. And so there are a lot of different contexts, and that's where being familiar with the scholarship, looking at study Bibles and reading the introductions about date and authorship and context and genre and all that kind of stuff, and reading the commentaries, that's going to help you be aware of how scholars divide these things up and where they date and place their compositions. So yeah, there's no one answer that works for either of those. And I think the introductions to the New Testament, the introduction to the Hebrew Bible are also very good resources for helping you figure that out. Chuck KV, thanks so much for the question. Presumably sometime after Champollion, it became clear that the Hebrew alphabet is modified Egyptian. Watched your course teaser. How and when did scholars realize this and piece it together? It starts in the 19th century. But there have been some discoveries of kind of intermediary alphabets. So the Isbet Sarda and some others. I forget the name of the place here, I forget the name of the place. But in the Sinai Peninsula, basically, there are a handful of inscriptions that date to between like 1800 and 1500 BCE that seem to represent this transition from ideographic, syllabic Egyptian into something more alphabetic. So, piecing it together started in the 19th century, but the discovery of these inscriptions, and I don't remember when they were all discovered, but it was over a bit of time. And then the discovery of the Ugaritic text, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, a lot of these things help us fill in gaps in our understanding of the development of the alphabet. But you have books by like Joseph Nave, which is not, I don't think it's called The Invention of the Alphabet. Early History of the Alphabet is a good discussion of that. Seth Sanders has a wonderful book called The Invention. I think it's called The Invention of Hebrew, actually. The Invention of Hebrew, that's going to talk about that. Probably the text that is most detailed and comprehensive is one, and I don't recall if it talks about the history of scholarship. Sorry, there's Acrobat Pro being like, oh, you wanted to fill up the whole desktop with this? No. For the most detailed discussion of the relationship of West Semitic alphabet to Egyptian scripts, I would recommend Gordon Hamilton, The Origins of the West Semitic Alphabet in Egyptian Scripts. And if you, if you looked at the teaser for my Hebrew course, I think there was a page where I share a handful of books that talk about that. But yeah, in terms of the history of the scholarship, I'm trying to think. I don't know if there's been a publication that was like, here is the history of how scholars put it all together. But certainly it's scattered among those books to some degree. It might be hard to piece together from them, though. But thank you for a great question. Was it Kirbet something or was it Wadi al Hol? I think Wadi al Hol is one of them, but hang on a second. What was I thinking of? Wadi al Hol is definitely one of them. Oh, not Kirbet. It was Serbid al Khadim. That's the main one I was thinking of. That's where there were like 30 to 40 inscriptions found. Okay, it has been an hour, and I need to see how my daughter is doing. So I'm gonna. Oh gosh, there are a lot of questions left. Okay, I'm going to try to get through these questions As quickly as I can. 1920s, thank you so much. Is there any data supporting the idea that the Amalekites wore specific clothing to distinguish who was a virgin and who wasn't? Doubtful. I think there might have been a situation where when someone was married, maybe they start wearing a veil or something like that. That's certainly possible. I don't know that there was anything limited to the Amalekites on that. Thaddeus, were you able to see my previous super chat? Maybe I don't think so. I'm scrolling back through. It's possible I missed. Oh, here we go. Is Jesus telling people to never call anyone fools? Raka, it's hard, especially these days, refraining from calling people foolish or being angry at fools. I think the idea being that this is some kind of like an outburst, but yeah, but I think there's a degree to which it is also hyperbole. That is trying to emphasize how important this is. I don't think anyone should take that seriously enough to say, you're going to hell if you call anybody a doofus or something like that, because then there would be nobody left. Michael Stevens, thanks so much for the question. Hey, Dan, what do you think of Balaam's story where God sent him on a mission and then sent an angel to kill him? Looking forward to the book. I'm looking forward to the book coming out too, and I hope you'll let me know what you think of it. Most scholars would say this seems to be pieced together from different tellings of this story, because there's no reason for God to come down and try to kill Balaam for doing precisely what God told him to do the night before. So yeah, that is almost certainly the result of the juxtaposition of two different layers from different tellings of the story. Ryan, thanks so much for the question. In Matthew 11:12, Jesus says the kingdom of heaven has been subjected to violence, and violent people have been raiding it. Does Matthew imagine the kingdom to come as an earthly renewed Jerusalem? I think a lot of scholars would suggest that in the Gospels, and particularly in Matthew, the idea of the kingdom of heaven is something that would be on earth, and is something that they were trying to achieve for this temporal existence. But there is some fuzziness to that. But I would recommend there are 3 volumes to the Hermeneia commentaries, commentary series, Matthew contribution. So there's an awful lot of discussion about the kingdom of heaven in those volumes that would probably give you an awful lot more detail than I can right now. Nathaniel, thank you so much. People like Rabbi Sachs celebrated Jewish pluralism, but given your knowledge in cognitive theory, is religious pluralism real or wishful thinking? I like pluralism is definitely real. Religion is kind of situationally emergent in a lot of different ways, and so people can practice religions in numerous different ways that still fall under the kind of umbrella of a given religion, like Christianity, like Judaism, and stuff like that. So I think it's definitely. Yeah, it's definitely real, unless I'm misunderstanding some kind of technical or term of art sense of religious pluralism. Casey, thank you so much for the question. Hey, Dan, big fan. Thank you. I appreciate that. Does your new book address tattoos? My coworker told me his pastor ranted against them for 15 minutes last week. No, it does not. That's one of the things that I was like, that's on the list for volume 2 if I'm ever able to come out with one, along with a bunch of other questions about like immigrants and women in ecclesiastical leadership and stuff like that. But yeah, we just have this passage in Leviticus where you don't tattoo yourself. And I think most scholars would say this has to do with some kind of cultic practice, probably associated with mourning the dead or ancestor cults or something like that. And so it doesn't really have anything to do with why people get tattoos today. And also, Leviticus is not really applicable to non-Jewish folks, and particularly like evangelical Christians today. And a lot of folks will be like, well, there are moral laws and there are ceremonial laws and there are civic laws, and tattoos are not a moral law. So I don't know why anyone would think that is still applicable. GP, please leave citations in your YouTube video descriptions. I've had a couple people recommend that to me recently. That is definitely something that I need to do. Thank you for reminding me. Nathaniel, is deconstructionism in religion good or misguided? I think it's good because deconstruction is basically dismantling the worldview that you've been raised and conditioned to accept, so that you can then put back together a worldview that you can stand behind and appreciate, and that you yourself are responsible for constructing. So I think it is necessary and good, irrespective of the tradition or non-tradition that you've grown up in. At some point, everybody needs to interrogate their own upbringing and the worldview that they were conditioned to accept, and decide if it's for them or not, or if some kind of variation or renegotiation of it is better. The Absolute, thanks so much. Hey, Dan, I wanted to know your position on faith and respect. Where's that line we should draw between being respectful of different faiths and simply wrong positions about facts about the world? I think that's going to differ from person to person. For me, what I would say is I try to respect faith positions unless and until they are causing harm to other people, or causing harm to the ability of people to live harmoniously in a society. And so I think that's the point when I have to put my foot down. And but there's also the difference between respecting and liking, thinking they're legitimate and stuff like that. There are an awful lot of positions that I don't think make any sense at all to me, or are pretty wacky, but I would, in person or even on social media, respect the person's right to hold those beliefs, and even respect the beliefs to some degree. But I respect that a lot of people disagree with that. Gravity Fallout Pines, thank you so much for the question. You have supercharged my interest in the scriptures these past few weeks. Thank you. Well, I'm very glad to hear that. That means a lot. Thank you for letting me know. Nathaniel, is resurrection bodily for Jews and Christians? That's going to depend on your Jewish person or your Christian. I can't speak for either of those groups unilaterally. Certainly, there are many folks within both that think so, and there are also many folks within both that don't think so. So I think it's a mixed bag. Danelle, thank you so much for the question. What is your position on the dating of the Gospel of Thomas? Just read Elaine Pagel's book, Beyond Belief, so I was wondering on your take. I think that there are probably some utterances in the Gospel of Thomas that probably predate the canonical Gospels, that are not in the canonical Gospels. I think the majority, however, is probably early 2nd century CE. So whether they've collected things from earlier and put it together, or whether the Gospel of Thomas grew incrementally as more people added to it, I don't know. But I think it probably spans a pretty large window of time. David, thanks so much for the question. Hey, let me know if this thought is stupid. The NT doesn't condemn OT slavery precisely because Gentiles as such aren't ontologically transformed into full persons, i.e. redeemed until the new covenant. Any precedent here? I don't think the authors of the New Testament thought that anybody was exempt from enslavement through redemption anyway. So I don't, that doesn't really make sense to me. But I would have to see a fuller argument to say whether it's you're just being up in the night, or if we just happen to disagree on a few kind of constituent points of the argument. How are ages calculated in the Old Testament? Thank you, Zach. I mean, do you mean by the authors? I think an awful lot of it is just traditions or literary creations. If you mean how do we translate them and calculate them, we just go by what's in the text. They say, he was the days of the years of his life were so many years. But I don't know exactly what you're asking there. Now, if you're talking about chronology, there are a bunch of different ways that they do that. Usually what we try to do is anchor things to some kind of event that we can very confidently date. And then try to work out from there based on what other kinds of events are associated with that in the text, how old somebody might be said to be at the time of that event, or stuff like that. And that can get pretty complex, and there are a lot of gaps, a lot of assumptions that have to be made. And then, there are other chronological consensuses and assumptions and arguments involving carbon-14 dating, or when did Shishak's invasion happen, and all that kind of stuff. So it can get pretty complex if you're talking about how do we date events and when people lived and stuff like that. Tariq, thanks so much for the question. Did Paul or disciples thought that Jesus was God? I think that they thought Jesus represented God and manifested God's presence. I don't think Paul thought Jesus was the very God of Israel. I think by the early 2nd century CE, we have people saying Jesus is God, but not really having a fully fleshed out concept of what that means or how precisely Jesus is both God and somehow not God. Ryan, thanks so much. In Matthew 19:12, Jesus condones cutting off your junk for the kingdom of heaven. What the hell is happening in Matthew's community? So there are scholars who would suggest that this is probably a little metaphorical, that the idea there is those people, swear off sex. They vow to live a celibate life. And so that's kind of metaphorically making yourself a eunuch. There are scholars who suggest that this probably was taken quite seriously by the Matthean community. In this time period, celibacy and asceticism were quite popular, and those people were considered to be particularly pious. And so, interestingly, one of the things that was decided at the Council of Nicaea, in fact, I think it might have been the very first piece of canon law on the list, was that anyone who castrated themselves was ineligible for the priesthood. So it was something that was taken seriously by early Christians and was probably in vogue to some degree at the time that the Gospel of Matthew was written. Tiago, what is the fit for this live stream? Don't know how well you can read it, but it says, LeVar Burton says, read banned books. Danny, thanks so much for the question. Hey, Dan, what's it all mean? 42 is what it all means. And more than that, I'm afraid I'm not allowed to reveal. But thank you for the question. Frank, thanks so much. I saw that there's an evolution of Jesus's godliness over the temporal order of the Gospels. Example, first being born, then being born of a virgin, then being the direct Son of God. Can you explore? Yes. So Gospel of Mark seems to have Jesus. The story begins at Jesus's baptism and the beginning of his ministry, and a lot of scholars think that this is a kind of an adoptionist Christology, where either at his baptism or at his transfiguration, Jesus becomes the Messiah or becomes endowed with divine authority. Then we get Matthew and Luke, both of them take Jesus's divinity back to his birth, where there are these miraculous things that occur associated with his birth. And then John is a more philosophical approach that is adopting a middle Platonic idea of the Logos. So Jesus, prior to his incarnation, was the Logos, that was God's rationality before being expressed, and the Logos prophorikos, and that is when the Logos kind of separated from God. So it's basically the tradition growing and evolving and responding to challenges and questions by pushing Jesus's divinity further back in time until Jesus becomes the superlative and co-equal and co-eternal with God. But thank you for a great question. Joshua, thank you so much. Love your work. I appreciate the very kind words. Is there evidence that any of the Israelite conquests from the Hebrew Bible actually happened? No, not in the way that they are said to have happened. Surely there were battles between the Israelites and those in surrounding communities, and we do have evidence that the conflicts with, like, the Moabites, for instance, were probably to some degree historical, particularly in 2 Kings 3. That probably is historical because it seems to reluctantly acknowledge that Israel was unsuccessful in trying to either obliterate Moab or return them to vassalage. And the Moabite, the Mesha inscription, the Moabite stele, the Mesha stele, however you want to call it, that could be Moab's account of a very similar story. At least one of the events that's narrated in that inscription could be talking about the same events as 2 Kings 3. So some of the conflicts certainly are historical. The conquest narrative, however, from Joshua, no, that's not historical. Danny, I'm in my Ram Dass phase of my faith journey. LOL. LOL indeed. Thank you so much for the chuckle. Zach, thank you for the question. Hey, Dan, how are ages calculated in the Old Testament? How could someone live for 900 years? Yeah, they didn't. That's just a tradition. That's probably coming from the exilic period when they are borrowing from some of the king lists. that in earlier periods, in the early 2nd millennium BCE, they had kings reigning for thousands and even tens of thousands of years. And by the time you get down to the Neo-Babylonian period, which is when the exile happened, the ranges are a little lower, but those are probably the traditions that the authors of Genesis are riffing on. So yeah, those are literary creations. Dan, thanks so much for the question. Is the Genesis curse alleviated after the flood? I don't think so. Although I think the flood is a late interpolation into some of the Genesis traditions. So I think we have some later things that are operating in view of the flood and some things that are entirely ignorant of the flood. But the curse itself doesn't really pop up anywhere else in all the Hebrew Bible. So I don't think it was very salient. Shashank Singh, good morning, Dr. Maklelan. Good morning. Do you think that the Bible consistently upholds monolatry? Passages in Exodus and Deuteronomy suggest so. Sorry for my English. No apologies necessary. I think monolatry is one. That and henotheism are a couple of frameworks that have been floated since the late 19th, early 20th century as kind of intermediary stages between polytheism and monotheism. I think it's better than monotheism, although I think it has its issues as well. So what I would say is I don't think any of those labels perfectly fits for all the Bible, but I think the one that fits the least would be monotheism. Thank you for the question. BLR, thank you so much. What data do we have on taboo language / terms in ancient times? I'm having conversations about whether or not cussing is addressed in the Bible. There, you have occasional references to bad talk, but that could just as much be like spreading rumors and speaking ill of others as it could be about profanity. You do have some terms that seem to be vulgarities, like Paul skevalon is a term that could be a vulgarity. That is usually translated something like dung or crap, but is probably a little harsher than that in reality. So there are, I know there have been at least papers, if not monographs, on that kind of thing, but none of them are popping into my mind. Actually, that would be a great question for a video, though. So I'm going to take a note real quick. Okay, I'm gonna do some more research on that and come up with a better answer for you. Nathaniel, thanks so much. Why are Psalms of passages of God's wisdom feminine? Because the word for wisdom in Hebrew, chokhmah, is a feminine noun. And so when you personify chokhmah, usually you're going to do so as in the feminine. And that happens with Greek as well. Sophia becomes feminine, and so the goddess of wisdom in Greek traditions is feminine. So that's the main reason. Now that doesn't always hold, because the word for spirit, ruach, is also feminine. But if you look in like 1 Kings 22 with Micaiah, and I saw the Lord seated on his throne, surrounded by the host of heaven. And God asked for volunteers to entice Ahab to his death. And then it says, the Spirit came forth. And then the verbs and the pronouns that are used to refer to the Spirit talking and interacting with God are all masculine. But the word ruach, spirit, in Hebrew is feminine. So it doesn't hold all the time, but usually things like chokhmah, that's feminine. And so the personification of chokhmah is going to be feminine. Orsak, Narrative Universe, thank you so much. As a man with a beard, got to say A+ facial hair compliments to your barber. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I had to kind of clean things up myself a little bit recently, but yeah, I need to get back to my barber. Mark, thank you so much. From Felix Ross, do you think the only reason people are religious is because it gives them some semi-reason for existence, or do they truly believe in the entire thing? It's a little of both, and I think you can. The cognitive science of religion has done a lot to identify how and why religion pops up and perseveres, and it's a combination of reasons. So everybody's a little bit different. Certainly there are folks who do it because of death anxiety and things like that, and it gives them a sense of understanding and control. And certainly there are people who were raised to believe all of it and believe it all 100%, irrespective of its relationship to any kind of death anxiety or stuff like that. So I think it's a mixed bag, but I would highly recommend something like Pascal Boyer's book, The Fracture of an Illusion, or Ilka Pisianian's book, How Religion Works, or Ara Norensayan's book, Big Gods, for more discussion of that kind of stuff. Chrissy, thank you for a question. Does monotheism, the belief in only one singular divinity, even exist outside of purely analytical philosophy texts, in your opinion? I have trouble even considering modern Christians monotheists at this point. I think it doesn't exist. I think when we look at Christianity, at Judaism, at Islam, they all have features that that would complicate the notion of the existence of only one God. And the only exceptions are those who have turned around and used philosophical interrogation to try to weed out the non-monotheistic things and then say, now I have produced something that is truly monotheistic, which is kind of a secondary renegotiation. Likewise, Athtar is male, but his counterpart in East Semitic languages was female, Ishtar, despite a masculine gender name. Yeah, so it is, they handle it in different ways. And Simone says, to this I would add, if the question is answered in a negative, what analytical category would the doctrine of Tawhid fall into? I think that comes the closest to real philosophical monotheism, because it comes in a period in late antiquity when philosophy was a little more salient in the development of religious ideologies. So I think that comes the closest, but yeah, that's a that's a big problem. I've actually got an essay on monotheism coming out in the Oxford Research Encyclopedia of Religion. I think I submitted my final edits, so it should be out within the next few weeks. But I discussed this a little bit. I don't really discuss it in relative to Islam. I actually recommended that the essay be entitled Biblical Monotheism, but they just called it monotheism. But yeah, the person who coined the term monotheism, Henry Moore, said that Muslims had a false pretense to monotheism and that they were only pretending to be monotheists. So, okay, hopefully we're getting close to the end here. I have got to finish up. Blank Tester, thanks so much for the question. Do you think there's a way to live life without any dogmas at all? No. Would that be a virtuous thing to strive for? I think striving for it would be certainly a virtuous thing, but I don't think that the human mind and living a human life, I don't think that's a possibility. And yeah, I think there's a degree to which that would become all-consuming and probably create more problems than it solves. Shashank, thanks so much for another question. Do you ever imagine yourself applying your knowledge to Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism? Are you aware of any such studies? There are a lot of studies on Hinduism and Buddhism. I wish that there were that many hours in a day and that many years in a lifetime, but I don't see myself ever having enough time to be able to dedicate commit the necessary time to becoming adept at those studies. Nathaniel, thank you so much. Is Moses' wife Cushite or beautiful in Hebrew text? I think it describes her as Ethiopian, but I don't think Cushite or beautiful. I don't think that's a binary in the Hebrew. But yeah, I think that's just that's just in one text that we see that, particularly the text where Aaron and Miriam get the hammer. S. Mill, thank you so much. Did you ever find anything about first BCE to second CE people looking for hidden codes in various texts? I asked about a while ago. I have not found anything about that. Certainly, we see some gematria and some things like that are between the lines. But in terms of people trying to say, look what I found the secret message. No, I have not found anything on that. BLR, people tend to go to Strong's and pick senses they like. Yeah, that's one of the problems. They'll see a list of potential senses and they'll either say it means all of it at the same time, or they'll say, I like that one. And that's just arbitrary. And that is one of the dangers of doing that without knowing what you're talking about. Please don't submit any more super chats if you haven't already. I'm trying to get through these so I can go take care of my the girls. Marcus, thank you so much for the question. Have you ever heard of the Lacerda files? It's a story about an interview of a terrestrial lizard woman who claims humanoid, tall, pale aliens named the Elohim intervened in the evolution of humans. I have not heard of that, but I'm going to look it up because that sounds fascinating. Thank you so much for letting me know about that. Nathaniel, thanks so much for the question. Are immortal souls limited to humans, pets too? I mean, that's a theological question. I think the Bible would suggest immortal souls are limited to humans, but if you go look in, Egyptian and probably some Israelite or Judahite burials, there are pets and things like that that are included. So I don't know, but who's dang it? Chris Stapleton has a wonderful song called Maggie, where he says at the end that he can promise a dog has a soul. And that's a beautiful song. Ryan, thank you so much. Corinthians were speaking and interpreting tongues. Nearby pagan priests are interpreting the gibberish of the Oracle of Delphi. Why isn't Paul instructing his other churches on this practice? I think it may not have been salient in these other communities, or it may not have been something that he was asked about, because most of these letters are responses to concerns or controversies that have arisen within those communities. And so Paul is writing letters back to them about that. So I'm sure that was going on in a variety of different places, but it may never have come up in some of the other communities that he had founded. Johnny, thank you so much. In Matthew 19:9, is Christ teaching divorced people shouldn't remarry? I think that was not the intention, but that is the implication of what he's saying. If you have divorce for any reason other than adultery and you remarry someone else, then you are not adultery. Or was it adultery? It was a sexual sin of some kind. So I think that's an implication, but I don't think the author was like, I've got to get those divorced people to stop remarrying. I doubt that was what it was about. I think it was mainly about trying to stop them from divorcing wives and leaving them kind of destitute. Aniket, thank you so much for the question. What are the scholarly consensus on various hypotheses on biblical authorship, and where do you stand? Love your channel and thanks for your work. Well, thank you so much for the kind words. That's a difficult question to answer. There are a lot of different positions on a lot of different texts. But yeah, basically in the New Testament, the only text where we think the claimed authors are the actual authors would be the genuine Pauline epistles and then the book of Revelation, although the John who wrote Revelation was certainly not the John who wrote the epistles of John or the Gospel of John. And in the Hebrew Bible, it's even more difficult to pin down anything. And I don't know that we have any text where we could say, yeah, the person who claimed to have written that is the one who actually wrote that in the Hebrew Bible. But if I'm able to get this large-scale survey on the state of this field of biblical studies released, that would be one of the things that would be on there. Nathaniel, thanks so much for the question. Reincarnation in Isaiah and multiple souls in Kabbalah. I don't know about Kabbalah. Reincarnation in Isaiah, I don't think that's plausible, but I would have to hear a fuller argument. Thank you, Daniel, for the super chat. GP, time to take care of your daughter. I thank you. Yes, I agree. I'm going to try and get through these last few folks who paid before I go. Daniel, how did circumcision come about? Was it prevalent in other cultures, or did the Hebrews choose it for a specific reason? Yes, it was practiced in Egypt before it was adopted by early Israel. It was probably used as an identity marker. It probably had something to do with some sense of purity, some kind of ritual marking transition to manhood or something like that. And it was a way to, and it became an identity marker. It became a way to distinguish Israelites from others. Nathaniel, thank you so much. Favorite and least favorite book, Bible books. Least favorite would be the book of Revelation. Favorite would probably be Deuteronomy. Michael, thank you so much for the question. TLO, hello, Dr. Maklelan. What is your opinion on why Noah cursed Canaan in Genesis chapter 9? It seems like he does it for no apparent reason. Thanks. I've got a whole video on that on YouTube. It's like a 14-minute video. And that is... let me just try to give you the date. Okay, so I posted it 3 years ago. What did Ham do to his father Noah in Genesis 9:20 through 27. That's a 13-minute video explaining it in depth, but my opinion is that this is actually a few different stories that are being mashed together. And the idea is that Noah was naked, and his nakedness was not respected, and that is why the curse came about. But it was really just an etiology for why Israelites and Judahites should be able to enslave other Canaanites and should be able to subdue and subordinate them, because it all goes back to this thing that happened long ago. But thank you for the question. Nahuel, thank you so much. Hey, Dan, what's up with Paul insisting that everything is permitted? That's an interesting and a difficult question that I don't really have incredibly strong feelings on, but I think the idea is somewhere along the lines that when you are living in the gospel, you're no longer under the law, and so you are not prohibited from doing anything. However, as a follower of Jesus, you're not going to want to do things that are wrong. Paul also spends an awful lot of time talking about how people who do X, Y, and Z are not going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. So it's kind of a complex prescription and soteriology. John, thanks so much for the question. I'm no longer religious and believe that politics, political parties, and religions and churches are all just arms of the flesh. Mankind has not yet created the right God for me. Thanks for all you do. Well, I appreciate it. I can understand your feelings very well, and I think there are more and more people who are feeling like that as well. Jess, go take care of your family. You're good. I appreciate it. I think I've got 3 more, and then I will bid you all adieu. Freethinker Podcast, thank you so much. From Internet Infidels, does the Bible clearly state whether Adam and Eve had libertarian free will? And if they did not, do you believe God would have to had been the direct cause of their sinning? Libertarian free will, if they did, I don't think they were cognizant of it. I don't think the story was written with free will in mind. So I think any attempt to try to find a position is going to require reading into it. And I think the direct cause of their sinning, I don't think you would really call it a sin. Yeah, and additionally, I think there's a good case to make that God was being deceptive, being dishonest, being coercive regarding the consuming the fruit. And I think the serpent was being honest with Eve, because what the serpent said would happen is absolutely what happened. So I don't think the story is about that, and I don't think the story is addressing that. I think the story is an etiology that is doing different things. Michael, hi Dan, briefly, aside from circumcision being an identity marker, can you offer any explication of the bloody bridegroom incident in Exodus? Not really. I think most scholars would say there is probably some pre-existing tradition that this is riffing on, but it is probably intended rhetorically to emphasize the importance of circumcision as an identity marker, and might even function as a kind of scary stories to tell in the dark. God's going to come kill you if you don't circumcise your kids or something like that. So that's one where scholars wish we had more data and a bit more context so we could gain some purchase on what exactly was going on there. And then BDYT, thank you so much for the super sticker. I appreciate it very much. All right, thank you everybody so much for your time. I appreciate it. I'm sorry I was not able to get to back to the live chat. It looks like things were going off in the live chat. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention and for the support. And thank you as well to the folks on Instagram. I tried to get to as many of those comments as I could, but I just don't like the way Instagram is organizing this thing, because every time somebody joins or leaves, I get a notification, so I have to scroll through just to find the comments and the questions. I'm going to see if I can figure out a way to make that more efficient. But thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you happen to be. I hope you have plenty of people around you who love you. I hope you have somewhere warm and safe to spend the night. I hope you have plenty of food on the table, and I appreciate your support very much. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. Bye, everybody.